Hello. Just a bit of history, but a most intriguing bit. It's funny what you can do with coat hangers. I think you can see that map now all right. That's a map of the county of Dorset, which is the heart of the kingdom of Wessex, Hampshire, Wiltshire, Somerset. And on that map I've put pins in to represent those villages in Dorset which are no longer there, that have absolutely vanished. There are traces of them can be found. People tend to call them the plague villages, and the generally accepted thing has been for ages that those villages died because everybody in them was killed by the Black Death. Well, that's quite a likely thing, because the Black Death killed at least a third of the inhabitants of Great Britain and may have killed 50%. But if you look closely at that map, you can probably spot that there's something wrong with a simple explanation of that sort. Let's see in fact what happened. That is the port of Melcombe Regis. It was an ancient port of Britain at this time. It's now got completely absorbed in Weymouth, but it was an ancient port, and it had been used ever since Stone Age times for people entering Britain. And in the spring of 1348, a ship sailed into the port from Gascony with rats aboard, as I suppose all ships had in those days. And at that moment, the Black Death entered Britain. It had reached London by the autumn of the same year. It's no accident that it came from Gascony, because the British army was at that time fighting the French in Gascony. They were always fighting the French during those centuries, but the particular war at that time was in Gascony. And I'm no doubt at all that that boat that came back was a military transport. It had probably come back to get another batch of archers to take out. And with it, it brought the Black Death, because the Black Death had started around the Crimea, Constantinople, somewhere like that, as far as we know, although it may have came earlier from China. But it came along the Mediterranean during the previous year. It invaded Italy and all the Mediterranean countries, and it ended up in Spain. And Spain, at that time, was suffering under the Black Death, and it had come over the Pyrenees, no doubt, into the area where the British were fighting the French, and that's how it had got aboard that boat. And this is the point where it entered Britain. And this is the point where the people first died. And of course they went on dying for quite a considerable time. It didn't all happen in 1348. In fact, it was, the Black Death was still killing people in Dorset, as far as we can make out, in at least 1361. It became an obsession with the people of Dorset. In fact, for centuries afterwards, and I'm told that for centuries afterwards, they built all the houses in this lower parts of Dorset with no windows on the south side, because they were absolutely sure, some of them, that it was the wind that brought it. And I was told when I first started to come to Dorset that there were cottages that you could find in Dorset which, if you looked at them, you suddenly realised they had no windows at all on the south side. All the windows were on the north, or the northeast, or the northwest. As a matter of fact, I've never been able to find one of them. If anybody can tell me where one such cottage is, I'd be delighted to hear it. But nevertheless, it did deeply grow into the roots of Dorset. They hit it first. London got it by the autumn. London wasn't expecting it. They were having a high old time. In fact, this was the year in which the king founded the Order of the Garter as a result of some splendid romp that went on among the court. But let's try and find out a little more about the detail of it. Let's go and have a look at one of these deserted villages, at a place about 45 miles north of here, right up on the top of the chalkland. Well, first, this is where it came in. That is the actual point, Melcombe Regis. We're standing on the down above it. That's where the ship came in with the plague. And you'll notice that there are early cultivation strips there. No doubt some serf at this time was hoeing the early corn, which was just coming through, along those strips which had been ploughed by oxen when the dreadful ship landed at the port below him. And no doubt at all, probably within 3 weeks, that unfortunate fellow was dead. Now let's go up by the route that the plague took and look at this. This is an Anglo-Saxon arch in a church. So it's clear that this place was occupied by the Anglo-Saxons. It's called Knowlton, and ton in any way means a settlement in Anglo-Saxon. It's also clear that it was still occupied in Norman times, because we see that the Normans had rebuilt that arch. And there's another fascinating thing about it, because this wall is made of broken limestone of a sort that's available in the district, what they used to call rubble walls. But if we come out of here and walk along the rubble wall, you will see incorporated in it 2 or 3 great big dark red hard granite-like stones of the sort which the prehistoric people used to bring up all the way from Wales in order to build their early edifices like Stonehenge. And the fact of the matter is that this church, Saxon and Norman in its associations, is built in a prehistoric holy place, what they call a henge, a circle where the Druids held their ceremonies. And it's got a ditch and a wall round it. But archaeologists tell us that it's not the sort of wall that was built round forts to keep people out. It's a sort of wall that was built to keep the spirits in, so they didn't stray from the holy place all around the countryside. This, in fact, at this time was a very highly populated part of Britain. In fact, it was the only highly populated part of Great Britain here up on the chalk. Down below was still all forest. And if you walk along the wall of the henge, you'll find a gap on the north side. This was the entrance to it, and if you turn north, you'll be looking up, straight up the prehistoric way that ran up onto Salisbury Plain to Stonehenge. There you are. That way lies Stonehenge. And if you turn south, you will see on the other side there's another gap in it, and that one goes down the wall to Badbury Rings. So this really was on one of the most ancient trackways. And those yew trees there, they're obviously not the ones planted by the Druids, but wherever the Druids went they had yew trees, and they're obviously the descendants of those that were planted by the Druids. And all around this place there were people living, because it was a crossroads on the great old chalkways and a holy place, and all round it people were buried. One of the burial mounds has remained. I think because it was too big, this one, and too steep to be cultivated, so it remained, and trees grew on it. There you are, some chieftain or some high druid was buried there, and the trees grew on it, and I often wonder if the rooks that live in those branches were descended from rooks of the Druids' day. But what evidence is there of further occupation? Where are these Anglo-Saxons, or these later Norman English, who used this church? Well, let's go down the road towards the little river. If we stop here and look over that field, the other side of the hedge, you'll see on the left a high bank, not a natural one, undoubtedly a man-made bank, and it runs down off the swooping chalkland to a level long field which runs from that bank to the fence on the right, hedge on the right, where the little river flows. It was years of cultivation that produced that bank and levelled the land, and there's no doubt that that was one of the open fields of a village built on the river. And it appears at first sight to be the only evidence of occupation. Over the bridge, a little river, very rare up in these high hills, running out of chalk springs 5 miles away, which acted as a sort of oasis in the middle of the dry chalk. Walk down the other bank and turn back to look up towards the church, and we'll see another flat field. That perhaps might have been the site of the village. They would have put it on the water where they lived. They'd had to carry water up to the church if any was needed there. And it's far from the village because the Christians like to build their early churches in existing holy places in order to get a sort of propaganda start to the whole game. Now then, I'd love to have a helicopter and a pilot to look at these things, because this is an aerial photograph, and these aerial photographs were used so much. Look, there is the henge. See where the red high stones originally were around it. There's the Saxon-Norman church in the middle of it. There is the great barrow with the woodland and the rooks, and you can see there was a big ditch round it. Walking down towards, there's the yew trees, and walking down here, it looks like that's something, but actually that's modern silage pits. But if you come down here, there is the river. There is the bank and the first field we looked at, and we walked round there and we looked here. And if you look there closely, on the day this photograph was taken, as sometimes happened with aerial photographs, it revealed, because of the light and the state of the crops, this. The actual plots of the houses. The houses were up there and all the plots ran down to the stream. Now in a few minutes I'll come back and we'll try and find out why in fact that village really was deserted.